With the announcement of the return of the Silent King and the introduction of a new model to the tabletop, I thought it would be a really good idea to give ourselves a refresher on who this great Necron leader truly is. Let's dive back into the distant past of the 40K universe, 60 million years ago, before the war in heaven raged across the stars, and before the Necrons lost their souls, becoming the robotic warriors we know today. They were a race of flesh and blood, living on a morbid planet, constantly bombarded by ionizing solar winds and intense radiation storms. They called themselves the Necron tier, and they lived short and grueling lives. The entire race biologically evolved frail and cancerous bodies that led to early death, and this brief existence seeped into the Necron tier culture, as their home planet became a massive tomb complex, as generation after generation was venerated in these vast sepulchres, crypts, and mausoleums, dominating the entire landscape. But the remarkable thing about the Necron tier was that even though they had short lives, the species as a whole managed to advance their society to a technological level that allowed them to escape their radiation-filled prisons of a planet. Once out amongst the stars, the Necron tier colonized the planets around their home system, and within a matter of time, the Necron tier empire was born. After decades of colonization, the empire grew to encompass many subsectors in the galaxy, and each one was ruled over by powerful pharaohs that commanded their own Necron tier dynasties. These dynasties answered to a ruling triumvirate known as the Triarch, a council made up of 3 powerful pharaohs from the strongest dynasties in the empire. At the head of the Triarch was the Pharaoh of Pharaohs, known as the Silent King. This leader never personally directed the dynasties, instead he would give out his command to the 2 pharaohs who ruled alongside him, and they would address his subjects. This central ruling body was the highest seat of power, and their rule was enforced by the Triarch Praetorians, the most elite Necron tier warriors gathered from the ruling dynasties. Should a lord or an overlord ever rebel against the Triarch, the Praetorians would bring down death and destruction on the entire separatist dynasty. And this system worked for many decades, until eventually the territories of the Necron tier empire grew too large and internal struggle and disputes became too much. Each dynasty of the Necron tier sought to claim its own destiny, and soon the great houses were engaged in an all-out conflict known as the War of Secession. This civil war eroded the strong unity of the Necron tier, and if the Triarch would allow the schism to continue, the Necron tier would have just completely wiped themselves out. The Silent King at the time was the Pharaoh Zarek, a highly intelligent and tactical leader. He understood that in order to unify his people once again, he would have to bind the feuding dynasties to a common cause, a cause that would not only provide a challenge strong enough to maintain strict order, but also one that would provide enough spoils of war to keep the dynasties satisfied. The Silent King concluded that a war against the Old Ones, a psychically powerful alien species that had been encountered all throughout the galaxy, was the only way to bring together his empire. The Old Ones were painted as the ultimate enemy. Should the Necron tier destroy this ancient race, they would gain the secrets of immortality. And so the separatist Necron tier dynasties abandoned their War of Secession in favor of the Silent King's declaration of war against the Old Ones, in a war that would become known as the War in Heaven. Unfortunately for the Necron tier, the Old Ones proved to be far more powerful than the Silent King anticipated, and the species was pushed back until they were little more than an irritation to the Old Ones' dominance of the galaxy, a basic threat clinging to their morbid world amongst the halo stars, exiled and forgotten. And in the face of defeat, the always fragile unity of the Necron tier began to fracture once more. No longer did the prospect of a common enemy have any hold over the fractured dynasties. Scores of generations had now lived and died in the service of an unwinnable war, and many Necron tier dynasties would have gladly sued for peace with the Old Ones if the ruling Triarch had permitted it. Thus began the second iteration of the War of Secession. It had become way more widespread and ruinous than anything that had come before. So fractured had the dynasties become that if the Old Ones wanted to, they could have completely wiped out the Necron tier. Faced with the total collapse of their rule, the Triarchs searched desperately for a means of restoring order. In this, their prayers were answered when the Necron tier made a chance discovery of a galactic parasite-like entity known as the Catan. The Necron tier sought the favor of these star gods by forging physical shells that the Catan could occupy, made from the living metal known as necrodermis. Given the ability to focus their consciousness and having tasted the electromagnetic energies given off by the biological bodies and quite possibly the souls of the Necron tier, the Catan acquired a taste for biological life. One particular Catan known as the Deceiver approached the Silent King and offered him a deal. He would give him the unity that the Triarchs desired, and give the entire Necron tier race the immortality they sought. And on top of that, the Catan would teach the Necron tier how to wage war against the Old Ones in exchange for a simple and priceless alliance with the Catan. For long solar months he debated the matter with the other two pharaohs of the Triarch and the nobles of his royal court. The only dissenting voice was that of Orican, the court astrologer, who foretold the alliance between the Necron tier and the Catan would bring about a renaissance of glory, but destroy forever the souls of the Necron tier people. Yet desire and ambition swiftly overrode caution, and Orican's prophecy was dismissed. A year after the deceiver had presented his proposition, the Triarch agreed to the alliance, and one by one the Silent King watched as the bodies and souls of each of his people were consumed by the Catan and replaced with necrodermis bodies. The Silent King also went through the biotransference process, and his new machine was far mightier than the frail one that he had tolerated for so long. His thoughts were swifter and clearer than they had ever been, yet there was an emptiness gnawing out his mind, a hollowness of spirit that defied rational explanation. In that moment, he knew with cold certainty that the price of physical immortality had been the loss of his soul. With great sorrow, the Silent King beheld the fate he had created for his people. He had killed the Necron tier and given birth to the Necron race. This of course created hatred and resentment towards the Catan, but the Silent King was smart enough to hide it. Zarek would wait for the right moment to get his revenge on the Deceiver and the other Catan brethren. With the incredible pain of knowing he had doomed his people, but with vengeance on his mind, Zarek launched his Necron legions at the Old Ones and reawakened the war in heaven. Using the world-breaking technologies of the Catan and the Necron's unaging bodies, the Old Ones were forced back, and with victory against their ancient rivals almost secure, Zarek got his revenge against the parasite gods by ordering the Necron legions to revolt against the Catan masters. The Necrons managed to shatter the Catan bodies into thousands of fragments and enslave the shards into tesseract labyrinths in order to continue to use their godlike powers. This revolt opened up the Necrons to a war on two fronts, and in the ensuing battle the Silent King's two Triarchs were killed and millions of Necrons were destroyed. In the end, Zarek understood that the war in heaven had no definite winner. The Catan were enslaved, the Old Ones were abandoning their warrior races because of the enslaver plague they caused, and the Necron dynasties had suffered terrible losses. It was then that the Silent King gave his last order to his people: restore the Necron dynasties to their former glory after the Great Sleep. He sent the remaining Necrons into their tomb complexes and asked them to sleep, to wait out the extinction of the Old Ones' warrior races, but awaken ready to rebuild the glory of the Necron Empire once more. When the last tomb world was finally sealed, the Silent King gave his people his last and greatest gift. He bestowed the freedom stolen by the Catan. He destroyed the command protocol that he used to control his people and left the Milky Way galaxy in a self-imposed exile. While traveling through the great intergalactic void, Zarek encountered the Tyranids and quickly realized that the Great Devourer posed a terrible threat to his sleeping legions. He returned to the Milky Way galaxy in the late 41st millennium to find that many of the tomb worlds were in terrible shape. Working with the surviving Triarch Praetorians, he began a pilgrimage across the galaxy, awakening those tomb worlds yet to revive and speeding the recovery of other tomb worlds already awakened. Since then, the Silent King and his traveling legions have encountered resistance not only from the Great Devourer, but many of the Old One warrior races and some new pests that have gained control of the Milky Way galaxy. Most notably, the Silent King battled the Blood Angels chapter for 3 solar weeks, but were forced to break hostilities and battle the Tyranid splinter fleet alongside Dante and his Space Marines. During that battle, the Silent King was described as completely different in appearance to the Necron overlords that the Imperium has encountered. His body is muscular and lean, his movements show a vitality unseen amongst the robotic Necrons. Zarek appears simply elegant, as a true royal being capable of manipulating time and space should look. Truth be told, it seems that the Silent King is merely gauging the fighting prowess of most of the newer races in the Milky Way galaxy, and also just gathering information. His intention is to see that his Necron Empire rises again and takes control of the Milky Way galaxy. Destroying the rest of the warring factions is inevitable, but until he knows for certain that these biological bodies can't be used to house the consciousness of his Necrons and help obtain apotheosis, the Silent King will put up with the petty empires of the human, the orc, the eldar, and the Tau, and ultimately he wishes to destroy the Tyranids. Which finally brings us to the trailer that we saw over the weekend, the one that you guys are seeing with me right now. The first thing I want to show you guys is that the face of the Silent King is rubbed off, representing the resentment that his people still have. Many Necron overlords will still oppose the Silent King regardless of the fact that he is the Silent King, hence the schisms. You also, the schisms of the past, I should say. You also see the bodies of what appear to be Necrons take on very human forms. Now, we know from previous Necron updates that the Pariah is coming back. There have been Necron overlords, cryptex specifically, that have been manipulating the bodies of Pariahs or Nulls and trying to use them to create new Necron bodies. I think that the overall goal of the Silent King is to take humans and use them as bodies for the essence of his Necron warriors. In this way, he kind of repents for the fact that he let the Catan take the souls and the bodies of his population. Now he's giving the population the countless of like trillions and billions of imperial citizens that exist in what the Silent King believes to be his home. That way it kills two birds with one stone. Not only are you conquering all these worlds, but you're also seeding them with Necrons with human flesh and body. Now obviously that's speculation. What the actual outcome will be, we don't really know. We have to wait for May 23rd. I have a feeling that when we get the stats for the Silent King, we're going to see a lot of really cool time manipulation, because that was a big important part of him versus Dante. The reason that the Blood Angels were finding it so difficult to fight the Necrons is because they were able to manipulate time. They were able to slow down time. So seeing that as a stat for the Silent King is going to be pretty badass. Also, we will probably see some type of manipulation with human forms, taking prisoners, all that kind of stuff that the Silent King is trying to do. Now I want to hear from you guys. Comment down in the comment section below. Let me know what you think of this whole new portion of the Psychic Awakening. If you guys have any questions about the War in Heaven, about the Triarch, about anything else, just comment down in the comment section below, and I'll either create a video for you or I'll answer it there and then. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank our patrons on Patreon. It is because of them that we can make these videos. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I will talk to you guys in the comment section below. This was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Put my freedom first in anything.